Imagine walking through the high desert of Nevada, the air sharp and clean. You stumble upon a tiny, unassuming flower with delicate cream-colored blooms growing low to the ground, a unique life form found nowhere else on planet Earth. You've just discovered time's buckwheat. Now imagine decades later, someone else discovers that this same patch of seemingly barren ground holds a fortune, a massive deposit of lithium, the silvery white metal, often called white gold, the beating heart of the batteries powering our electric future. This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is the real story of time's buckwheat, a fragile plant clinging to existence directly above a lithium lode large enough to fuel millions of electric vehicles. It serves as a perfect, poignant emblem of the central, uncomfortable paradox confronting us all today. To save the planet with supposedly clean green technology, do we first have to dig it up, potentially scarring landscapes and destroying irreplaceable parts of our natural world in the process? Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf, the podcast where we decode the essential books shaping the thinking of top executives, innovators, and decision-makers. I'm your guide, unlocking the insights you need to lead effectively in a rapidly changing world. Today, we are diving headfirst into a subject that's becoming increasingly critical, yet remains surprisingly under-discussed in many boardrooms. We're exploring the themes and revelations from Ernest Scheyder's vital work, a book that masterfully dissects the global scramble for critical minerals, the fundamental elements underpinning our entire green energy transition. Let's call it the elements of power, reflecting its core message. We all increasingly desire, and are often mandated to adopt, electric vehicles, solar panels, wind turbines, and massive grid-scale batteries. We talk about decarbonization, net zero targets, and a fossil fuel-free future. But Scheyder forces us to ask the tough questions. Where do the essential raw materials, the lithium, copper, nickel, cobalt, graphite, and rare earth elements, actually come from? He pulls back the shiny green curtain to reveal a complex, often contentious world, simmering with conflict. It's a world where ambitious environmental goals collide head-on with the harsh realities and environmental impacts of large-scale mining. A world where lands held sacred for generations are pitted against urgent claims of national security and strategic resource needs. And perhaps most consequentially, for global business, it's a world witnessing a dramatic and unsettling shift in geopolitical power, moving away from the familiar dynamics of oil-producing nations towards a new reliance on mineral-rich countries, and crucially, the nations that dominate the processing of those minerals. A landscape where China currently holds a formidable, perhaps precarious, advantage. This episode isn't just a lecture on environmental science or geology, it's a deep dive into hardcore business strategy, critical supply chain risk management, evolving geopolitical landscapes, and the complex ethical tightropes that today's leaders must navigate. Over the next half hour, we'll unpack. First, the green paradox. We'll explore why the technology designed to save our climate carries its own significant environmental and social baggage, looking closely at that Nevada buckwheat. Second, the battlegrounds. We'll journey to Arizona to witness a profound conflict unfolding between indigenous rights, sacred land, and the insatiable demand for copper. Third, the new geopolitical choke points. We'll examine how the control of mineral supply chains, especially processing, is creating new vulnerabilities and reshaping global influence, focusing significantly on China's dominant role. And finally, navigating the maze, we'll discuss potential pathways forward, from responsible sourcing initiatives to technological innovations like recycling and new extraction methods, and extract actionable insights for you as leaders facing these stark new realities. So prepare to challenge your assumptions. Prepare to look beyond the marketing gloss of clean tech. Get ready to rethink everything you thought you knew about the true cost and complexity of going green. Let's start with that tiny flower in Nevada. Time's buckwheat. Remember Jerry Time, the amateur botanist who first documented it back in 1983. For decades, his discovery remained a quiet footnote in the annals of desert flora, known only to a handful of specialists. Fast forward to the 21st century, a mining exploration company called Ioneer confirms that the unique lithium-rich soil where the buckwheat thrives sits directly atop one of the largest known lithium and boron deposits in North America. Enough lithium, potentially, to power hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, of electric vehicles annually. Suddenly, that small, fragile plant isn't just a biological curiosity. It's perceived by some as a major obstacle to progress, a roadblock on the path to electrification and achieving climate goals. But from another perspective, is the massive lithium deposit the real obstacle, an obstacle to preserving unique biodiversity and honoring the intrinsic value of nature. This conflict, this tension between preservation and extraction for a supposedly green purpose, encapsulates the paradox Scheyder puts front and center. How did this become such a defining tension of our era? Scheyder meticulously lays out the context in his book. Driven by the global consensus solidified in agreements like the Paris Climate Accords, governments and corporations worldwide have committed to ambitious decarbonization targets. This has unleashed an unprecedented tsunami of demand for technologies reliant on critical minerals. Electric vehicles are perhaps the most visible example. They require significantly larger amounts of specific metals compared to their internal combustion engine predecessors. Think lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite for the batteries, plus substantially more copper for wiring and motors. The International Energy Agency forecasts staggering increases in demand, potentially a 40-fold rise for lithium by 2040, a 20-fold increase for cobalt and nickel, and a near doubling for copper, just to meet stated climate pledges. To satisfy this projected demand, we'd need something like 50 new lithium mines, 60 new nickel mines, and 17 new cobalt mines globally within the next decade or so, alongside expansions of copper production. But Scheyder doesn't just present statistics, he powerfully illustrates the human and environmental dimensions of this resource rush through compelling, ground-level stories like that of Lithium's buckwheat. Here we have an incredibly rare plant species, uniquely adapted over millennia to survive in soil conditions toxic to most other life. Precisely because of the high concentrations of lithium and boron, its entire known global habitat overlaps almost perfectly with the area Ioneer needs to develop for its mine. The brutal question hangs in the air: what matters more, protecting this unique, vulnerable species from potential extinction, or extracting the minerals deemed essential for transitioning away from fossil fuels, powering the growth of industries led by giants like Tesla and Volkswagen, and meeting national strategic goals for energy independence? Imagine Scheyder's prose capturing this dilemma, perhaps writing something like, "Thus, the paradox crystallizes on this dusty patch of Nevada desert. What matters more, the plant clinging to life or the lithium slumbering beneath it? Can the goals of environmental protection and climate mitigation coexist when they demand the same piece of earth? Whether these lands, and others like them across the globe, should be dug up in a large-scale industrial effort to defuse the climate crisis is rapidly becoming one of the defining and most divisive questions of our time." And crucially, Scheyder emphasizes this isn't an isolated incident. Similar battles are erupting worldwide, wherever valuable mineral deposits intersect with sensitive ecosystems, vital water resources, indigenous territories, or local communities. The laudable ambition for a greener future is running headlong into the often destructive environmental and social consequences inherent in extracting the vast quantities of raw materials required. It forces an uncomfortable reckoning with the true cost of progress. So what does this mean for you as a leader? You are almost certainly facing analogous paradoxes within your own organizations, perhaps on a different scale or in a different context. How do you navigate situations where two seemingly good objectives clash? Think about pursuing aggressive ESG targets that might conflict with near-term operational efficiencies or cost structures. Consider the tension between driving rapid innovation, which involves risk, and maintaining stability or regulatory compliance. Recall debates around community relations versus maximizing shareholder returns in the short term. The core takeaway from the Times buckwheat story is the urgent need to move beyond simplistic binary thinking, green versus not green, good versus bad. Effective leadership in this era demands frameworks and mental models capable of assessing the full life cycle impacts, considering all stakeholders, and acknowledging the inherent trade-offs in complex decisions. Are you and your teams asking the hard questions about the provenance of your so-called sustainable solutions? Are you probing beneath the surface claims? It's about embracing a truly holistic view of the triple bottom line, people, planet, and profit, but applying a deeper, more critical lens, especially to the planet aspect, understanding that even well-intentioned actions can have unintended negative consequences. Where are your company's hidden Times buckwheat conflicts? The places where stated values or goals might be subtly undermined by operational realities or supply chain complexities. Identifying them is the first step towards navigating them wisely. Now let's travel southwest from Nevada's high desert to the rugged terrain of Arizona, to a place known as Oak Flat, to the local San Carlos Apache tribe and other indigenous peoples of the region. This area is deeply sacred, known as Chichil-Beal-de-Gotil. It's not just picturesque land, it's a spiritual sanctuary, a place interwoven with their creation stories, home to traditional ceremonies, acorn gathering grounds, medicinal plants, and the resting place of ancestors reaching back countless generations. Beneath this hallowed ground, however, lies one of the planet's largest undeveloped copper deposits. Copper, the ubiquitous reddish metal essential for electrification. It's in the wiring of our homes and cities, critical for renewable energy infrastructure, like wind turbines and solar farms, and absolutely vital for electric vehicles, which typically use at least twice as much copper as conventional gasoline cars. This particular deposit is immense, estimated to hold enough copper to potentially meet a quarter of the entire United States' annual demand for decades. Two global mining behemoths, Rio Tinto and BHP, operating through a joint venture called Resolution Copper, are determined to extract it. But the San Carlos Apache and their allies argue that the proposed mining method will irrevocably destroy Oak Flat, obliterating their most sacred site. Again, a profound conflict. Who decides the fate of Chickle Builder Goatail? Ernest Scheyder delves into this complex and emotionally charged conflict with journalistic rigor and sensitivity in his book. He meticulously documents the painful history of the Apache people's forced displacement and mistreatment by the US government, contextualizing their fierce determination to protect what little remains of their ancestral and spiritual heritage at Oak Flat. He vividly contrasts this deep and tangible connection to the land with the undeniable, tangible, and strategically urgent need for vast quantities of copper to fuel the energy transition and modern economy. The proposed Resolution Copper project makes the stakes brutally clear. It relies on a method called panel caving or block caving. This involves tunneling deep beneath the ore body and strategically collapsing it downwards to extract the copper-rich rock. The unavoidable consequence, acknowledged by the company itself, is that the surface land above, including the sacred areas of Oak Flat, will eventually subside and collapse, forming a massive crater, potentially up to 2 miles wide and 1,000 feet deep. It's not a matter of if the site will be destroyed, but when and how completely. Add to this the significant concerns about water usage. The mine would consume vast quantities of water in an already drought-stricken region, and the immense volume of mining waste, known as tailings, that would need to be stored permanently in massive engineered dams, posing long-term environmental risks. Scheyder masterfully chronicles the political machinations surrounding the project. He highlights how the land transfer necessary for the mine to proceed was controversially attached as a last-minute rider to a must-pass National Defense Authorization Act in 2014, bypassing more thorough public review. He details the regulatory seesawing between different presidential administrations, the Obama administration initiating an environmental review, the Trump administration attempting to fast-track it, and the Biden administration subsequently pausing and reviewing the process again amid legal challenges and public outcry. He captures the raw human element, quoting Apache elders like Sandra Rambler, who expressed the profound spiritual loss. "If I want to go there and be able to pray there, I should have that right. That is my spiritual place." Yet, he also presents the perspective of local non-native community leaders, like former Superior Mayor Mila Besic, who pointed to the potential economic benefits for a struggling mining town, stating, "What's sacred to my community is that people have a job and have a home." This juxtaposition lays bare the gut-wrenching trade-offs involved. And it's crucial to understand, as Scheyder implies, this isn't merely an American issue. Similar conflicts between large-scale resource extraction projects and the rights, cultural heritage, and environmental concerns of indigenous peoples and local communities are playing out across the globe. Think of the Juukan Gorge disaster in Western Australia, where Rio Tinto destroyed ancient Aboriginal rock shelters, causing international outrage and forcing executive resignations. These are not isolated incidents. They are indicative of a systemic challenge in the global resource sector. For leaders listening today, the Oak Flat saga forces a critical examination of the S in ESG, the social dimension, particularly concerning indigenous rights and cultural heritage preservation. How does your organization approach projects or sourcing relationships that might impact culturally significant sites, sensitive ecosystems, or communities with historical grievances or unique vulnerabilities? The key takeaway here is inescapable, meaningful engagement with indigenous communities and local stakeholders, conducted early, transparently, respectfully, and continuously, is not just a nice-to-have or a public relations exercise, it is fundamental risk management. Leaders need to understand and increasingly align with principles like free, prior, and informed consent, which assert the right of indigenous peoples to give or withhold consent for projects affecting their lands and resources. Never assume that promised economic benefits automatically outweigh deeply held cultural, spiritual, or environmental values. These conflicts often involve fundamentally different worldviews and value systems. How robust is your company's process for stakeholder mapping, particularly in identifying and understanding the perspectives of potentially marginalized or vulnerable groups. Are you prepared for the long, often contentious, and legally complex nature these conflicts frequently take? Ignoring these social dimensions can lead to project delays, reputational damage, legal battles, and ultimately, operational failure. Let's shift our focus now to the global stage, to the shifting sands of geopolitics. Do you remember the oil shocks of the 1970s? The way dependence on OPEC nations suddenly became a major economic and strategic vulnerability for the West. Ernest Scheyder argues compellingly in his book that we are, perhaps unwittingly, trading one form of critical resource dependency for another. Only this time, the commodity isn't crude oil, and the dominant player isn't Saudi Arabia or a cartel of Middle Eastern states. It's a basket of critical minerals, lithium, cobalt, rare earths, graphite, and others, and the nation wielding disproportionate influence is China. How did the United States, which arguably pioneered industries like rare earth magnets, lose its commanding position in critical minerals? And more importantly, what does China's current dominance in mineral processing and supply chains mean for your business operations, your costs, and broader national security interests? Scheyder's book meticulously traces this historical shift, paying particular attention to the story of rare earth elements, those 17 chemically similar metals vital for high-strength magnets used in electric vehicle motors, wind turbine generators, and sophisticated defense technologies like the advanced sensors and targeting systems in F-35 fighter jets. He recounts how the US effectively created the modern rare earth industry, centered around the massive Mountain Pass mine in California, operated for decades by Molycorp. However, through a combination of factors, including stricter domestic environmental regulations that increased costs, a lack of long-term strategic vision, and crucially, China's deliberate state-backed strategy to dominate the sector through lower prices, massive investment, and sometimes laxer environmental standards, the US ceded its leadership over several decades. Molycorp eventually went bankrupt. Scheyder powerfully details how China achieved control not just over the mining of many critical minerals, but more strategically over the complex midstream processing stage. This involves chemically refining the raw ores into the high-purity metals and chemical compounds actually usable in manufacturing batteries, magnets, and other components. This processing stage is often energy-intensive, chemically complex, and can generate significant waste, making it less attractive for development in Western countries with stringent environmental oversight and higher labor costs. As a result, even minerals mined in allied nations like Australia or partners like Chile or the Democratic Republic of Congo very often make their way to China for final processing before being incorporated into products worldwide. This concentrated control over processing gives Beijing immense geopolitical leverage. They have in the past implicitly and sometimes explicitly threatened to restrict exports of processed rare earths during diplomatic disputes, sending shockwaves through global tech and defense industries. The saga of the Mountain Pass mine serves as a stark case study in Scheyder's narrative. After Molycorp's bankruptcy, the mine was eventually revived by a new entity, MP Materials. However, its ownership structure, which initially included significant Chinese investment and its continued reliance on sending its concentrated rare earth output to China for final separation and processing, raised alarms within the US Department of Defense and Congress. It highlighted the deep-seated vulnerabilities created by decades of neglecting domestic capabilities. The story encapsulates a broader pattern of strategic failure and the subsequent scramble to onshore or friendshore these critical supply chains. Imagine Scheyder reflecting on this shift, perhaps writing, "Thus before the world's very eyes, a profound transition is underway. The long-standing dependence of industrial economies on the organization of the petroleum exporting countries for energy is gradually but inexorably morphing into a new, perhaps even more complex, dependence on China, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Indonesia, Chile, and a handful of other nations for the fundamental building blocks of the green energy future." Adding another layer of complexity, Scheyder points to the often inconsistent and challenging policy and permitting landscape within the United States itself. Different presidential administrations have sent conflicting signals on the importance of domestic mining versus environmental protection. Even within a single administration, different agencies can seem at odds. Consider the debates and delays surrounding permits for projects like Resolution Copper in Arizona, the proposed Twin Metals copper-nickel mine near wilderness areas in Minnesota, or the Thacker Pass lithium project in Nevada. While recent legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act attempts to incentivize domestic production and processing through tax credits and grants, the lengthy, uncertain, and often litigious permitting process for new mines in the US remains a formidable hurdle, potentially taking a decade or more. What are the direct implications for leaders like you? This isn't some abstract geopolitical chess game happening far away. It directly impacts your supply chain resilience, your input costs, your manufacturing footprint decisions, and your long-term strategic planning. Relying heavily on a single geographic source, particularly one controlled by a potential geopolitical rival, for materials absolutely essential to your products or operations, constitutes a massive, potentially existential, risk. What happens if export controls are imposed? What if geopolitical tensions escalate? What if shipping lanes are disrupted? The actionable takeaway is clear. Leaders must proactively and rigorously map their entire supply chain, not just Tier 1 suppliers, but Tier 2, Tier 3, all the way back to the raw material source, specifically identifying vulnerabilities related to critical minerals. Where are your materials mined? Where are they processed? What countries control these nodes? Once you have that visibility, explore diversification strategies. Can you source the same mineral from multiple countries to reduce single point of failure risk? Can you cultivate relationships with suppliers in allied or geopolitically stable nations? Assess the feasibility of supporting or investing in initiatives aimed at building domestic or regional processing capacity, even if it comes at a higher initial cost. Consider it an investment in resilience. Ask yourself, how robust is our supply chain against potential geopolitical shocks, export restrictions, or logistical disruptions affecting critical minerals? What is our contingency plan? What's our plan B, and even our plan C? Ignoring these questions is no longer an option. Given the stark realities Scheyder presents, the environmental damage often associated with mining, the social conflicts we've discussed, and the deeply troubling ethical concerns surrounding issues like child labor in artisanal cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of Congo, a crucial question arises: is responsible mining truly achievable on the scale required? Or are we, in our urgent quest for green energy materials, simply destined to repeat the exploitative and damaging patterns of past resource booms? And what about technological salvation? Can innovation in areas like recycling or new extraction methods provide a cleaner, more ethical path forward, reducing our reliance on digging vast new holes in the ground? Scheyder explores these complex questions in his work, examining both the efforts towards responsibility and the potential of innovation, but always with a healthy dose of realism. He delves into initiatives like IAMA, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. This is a significant multi-stakeholder effort that brings together mining companies, downstream purchasers of minerals, non-governmental organizations, labor unions, and impacted communities. Their goal is to establish credible, comprehensive, and independently verifiable standards for environmental and social performance at mine sites across the globe. It covers everything from worker health and safety to water management, biodiversity protection, indigenous rights, and community engagement. It represents a serious attempt to drive transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement in a historically opaque industry. However, Scheyder likely notes that achieving widespread adoption and rigorous independent auditing across the diverse global mining sector is slow, painstaking work. Simultaneously, he shines a light on the burgeoning fields of battery recycling and alternative extraction techniques, particularly for lithium. Companies like Lithium, based in Canada, and Redwood Materials, founded by former Tesla CTO J.B. Straubel in Nevada, are pioneering advanced processes to recover valuable metals, lithium, cobalt, nickel, copper, from spent lithium-ion batteries found in EVs, consumer electronics, and manufacturing scrap. They shred these batteries and use hydrometallurgical processes to separate and refine the materials, aiming to create a closed-loop or circular economy where these critical elements can be reused again and again. Scheyder might explain concepts like black mass, the shredded powdery mix of battery cathode and anode materials that is the intermediate product, and discuss logistical models like Lithium's hub-and-spoke system, designed to process batteries regionally before centralizing final refining. Major manufacturers like Apple, with its Daisy disassembly robot, are also showing increasing interest in reclaiming materials from their own end-of-life products. Alongside recycling, Scheyder likely explores innovative techniques like direct lithium extraction, or DLE. Traditional lithium production often involves pumping lithium-rich brine from underground salt flats in places like Chile and Argentina into vast surface evaporation ponds, a process that takes months and consumes huge amounts of water in arid regions. DLE technologies aim to extract lithium directly from the brine much more quickly, using methods like selective absorption media or advanced membranes, and then re-injecting the bulk of the brine back underground. This promises a much smaller environmental footprint, faster production, and the ability to potentially tap lower concentration lithium resources like geothermal brines found near the Salton Sea in Southern California. This Salton Sea potential has attracted significant attention and investment from figures like Bill Gates and major corporations, including General Motors and Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway Energy. However, and this is crucial, Scheyder maintains a balanced perspective, highlighting the significant caveats and challenges surrounding these potential solutions. While positive developments, initiatives like IRMA face hurdles in terms of broad industry uptake and ensuring the integrity of audits. Battery recycling, while essential for the long term, cannot possibly meet the sheer volume of projected demand for new minerals in the coming decades. There simply aren't enough old batteries yet to recycle, and demand growth is exponential. Recycling will become increasingly important over time, but it's not a short-term fix for supply shortages. Similarly, direct lithium extraction technologies are largely still nascent, facing significant technical challenges and economic hurdles to prove they can operate reliably and cost-effectively at massive commercial scale. Berkshire Hathaway's slow progress at the Salton Sea, and perhaps setbacks faced by companies like EnergyX in ambitious projects in Bolivia, serve as cautionary tales. What does this nuanced picture mean for leaders? It underscores the need to adopt a multi-pronged approach. Fostering a culture of responsible sourcing within your organization is key. This means asking tough questions of your suppliers, demanding greater transparency, and potentially prioritizing partners who are credibly committed to higher environmental and social standards, perhaps verified through systems like IRMA. Simultaneously, supporting and keeping abreast of research and development in recycling technologies and alternative, lower-impact extraction methods is vital for building long-term supply chain resilience and reducing environmental footprints. The critical takeaway here is to be both optimistic about the potential of innovation, but also rigorously realistic about its current limitations and timelines. Don't build your entire strategic plan assuming unproven technologies will scale seamlessly overnight. Investigate claims critically. Ask potential technology providers and partners difficult questions about their demonstrated results at scale, their true economics, their energy and water consumption, their waste streams, and their overall environmental impact compared to conventional methods. Are you, as an organization, actively evaluating and perhaps piloting some of these emerging solutions in a controlled way? Are you building optionality and flexibility into your long-term mineral sourcing strategy, acknowledging that the landscape will continue to evolve? So, as we draw towards the close of this exploration inspired by Ernest Scheyder's work, what are the essential insights for leaders navigating the complexities of the 21st century? The clear message is that the path towards a decarbonized, greener future is not a simple, smooth highway. It's a winding road paved with profound challenges, unavoidable trade-offs, and deeply uncomfortable truths. We've confronted the green paradox, the stark reality that the technologies intended to heal our planet often rely on extracting materials through methods that can cause significant harm to local environments, biodiversity, and communities. The story of time's buckwheat versus the lithium deposit encapsulates this fundamental tension. We've visited the battlegrounds, witnessing the heart-wrenching conflicts that erupt when the urgent demand for strategic minerals like copper clashes head-on with sacred lands, indigenous rights, water resources, and the deeply held values of local communities, as exemplified by the ongoing struggle over Oak Flat in Arizona. We've grasped the new geopolitics of minerals, understanding the critical shift from a reliance on oil-producing nations to a new, potentially more fragile, dependence on countries rich in critical minerals, and crucially, those like China that dominate the vital midstream processing stages, creating significant supply chain vulnerabilities for businesses and nations worldwide. And we've touched upon the potential pathways forward, examining the promise but also the limitations of initiatives aimed at fostering responsible mining practices, the vital long-term role of battery recycling, and the nascent potential of innovative, lower-impact extraction technologies like DLE. Scheyder's reporting underscores that this is not a simple problem with an easy, off-the-shelf solution. There's no magic bullet. Navigating this complex terrain successfully requires clear-eyed, courageous leadership. It demands a willingness to engage with ambiguity and ethical complexity, robust strategic foresight to anticipate and mitigate risks, and a fundamental commitment to transparency and genuine stakeholder engagement. So the question I leave you with today is this: as leaders shaping the future of your industries and organizations, how are you preparing for this new resource landscape? Are you proactively asking the tough, sometimes uncomfortable, questions about the origins and impacts of your supply chains. Are you making concrete investments not just in efficiency and innovation, but also in resilience, ethical sourcing, and genuine responsibility? To delve much deeper into these critical global issues, the conflicts, the characters, and the data, we strongly recommend picking up a copy of Ernest Scheyder's insightful and timely book, which we've conceptualized here as The Elements of Power. It provides the kind of nuanced understanding essential for informed decision-making in this era. Thank you for tuning in to CEO's Library, the 1% Bookshelf. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and keep leading with wisdom and foresight.